Hey everyone, and welcome. We're going to dive into a pretty huge question today. What is a civilization anyway? And to figure that out, we're going to journey thousands of years back in time to meet one of the most incredible and ancient societies on Earth, the Harappan civilization. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to build a kind of civilization checklist. Then, we'll use that checklist on the Harappans. We'll explore their amazing cities, their economy, their ideas, and finally, we'll get into the great mystery of why they vanished. So let's start with the big puzzle right here. I mean, we all live in communities, right? But when does a group of people, a collection of towns and villages, cross that line and become something bigger, something we call a civilization? Let's figure that out. To get to the bottom of this, we need a framework, a clear way to really understand that huge leap from a simple community to a complex civilization. So let's start by defining what we're even talking about. At its most basic level, the word civilization just means that a human society has reached a more advanced stage. It's that moment when things get way more complex, more organized, when people figure out new ways to live together on a really large scale. But what does advanced actually mean here? Well, to be more specific, historians have kind of boiled it down to 7 key things. You can think of this as our official checklist. A civilization needs some form of government, big planned cities, that's urbanism, people making all sorts of different things, trade, a way to write things down, shared cultural ideas, and, of course, enough food for everyone. Get all 7 of those together and you've leveled up from a community to a civilization. So the big question is, do the Harappans check all these boxes? Let's find out.
All right, let's put our checklist to the test. We're going to start by stepping inside a Harappan city to see how they organize their world and how they fed everybody, which should help us tick off the first few items on our list.
First up, urbanism. Now, this is way more than just having a lot of people living in one spot. This is about design. Harappan cities were absolute marvels of planning. We're talking grid layouts, incredibly advanced systems for clean water and drainage. I mean, this was engineering on a scale that was unheard of for its time. And just look at this. This is a perfect example. This is the entrance to the city of Delavira. Look at that stonework, the sheer scale of it. This stuff doesn't happen by accident. This is the result of careful, deliberate planning. This is urbanism in action. Okay, so a city like Delavira doesn't just appear. To organize massive projects like huge gates, citywide plumbing, and giant water reservoirs, you need leaders. You need some kind of administration. So the fact that these cities even exist is probably our best clue that the Harappans had a working government. That's another box checked. Of course, none of this amazing city life is even possible if you can't feed everyone, and the Harappans had this sorted. They were supported by super productive agriculture. They grew all the staples you'd expect, like wheat and barley, but they were also the very first people in all of Eurasia to figure out how to grow cotton. That agricultural powerhouse was the engine that ran their entire civilization. So, with these organized cities and tons of food, the Harappans had the perfect foundation for a really complex economy. So now, let's look at the incredible things they made and how they moved them all over the ancient world. And this is where it gets really, really cool. With all their basic needs met, Harappans became master artisans. But they didn't just make things for themselves, oh no. They set up these huge trade networks, swapping goods not just with their neighbors, but with people in faraway lands. So these 2 things on our list, crafts and trade, were totally connected. So what exactly were they trading? Well, they exported all sorts of beautiful finished goods, like these amazing carnelian beads and intricate shell bangles. They also traded timber, gold, and of course, that super valuable cotton. And in return, they imported the raw materials they didn't have at home, especially metals like copper, which you absolutely need for tools. And check this out. This is one of the key tools of their trade, a Harappan seal. Archaeologists have found thousands of them. A trader would press this into a piece of clay on their goods, and it was basically like a stamp of ownership. It was their version of a made-in label or a company logo. It's a really sophisticated system, and you see those symbols on it? They're a clue to our next characteristic. Because a society this complex needs to move more than just goods. It needs to move information. It needs a shared understanding of the world. So let's look at the less tangible but absolutely vital parts of Harappan life. So those little symbols carved into the seals, they're not just decorations. They're a form of writing.
Now, full disclosure, we haven't actually figured out how to read it yet, but the fact that it exists is a massive deal. Having a writing system is absolutely crucial for keeping records, managing trade, and just communicating across a huge area. So another box checked.
And that brings us to our seventh and final characteristic, their cultural ideas. How did they see the world? This quote from the legendary archaeologist Bibi Lal gives us a really powerful clue. See, unlike a lot of other ancient empires built on kings and conquests, the evidence suggests Harappan society was built more on cooperation. This idea of mutual accommodation, of balance, seems to have been a really core part of their culture. So there you have it. The Harappans checked every single box. They were, without a doubt, a true civilization. But this is where their story takes a dramatic and pretty mysterious turn. After centuries of incredible success, their great cities just emptied out.
Let's put it on a timeline. For something like 700 years, from 2600 BCE, they are flourishing. But then, around 2200 BCE, something starts to shift. And by 1900 BCE, the great urban centers are being abandoned. It was a pretty rapid collapse after such a long, successful run.
So what in the world happened? For a very long time, the go-to theory was that they were wiped out by invaders. It's a simple, dramatic story. But there's one massive problem with it. There's basically zero evidence of any widespread war. No burned cities, no weapons hordes. In fact, it looks like the Harappans were a remarkably peaceful civilization. So if it wasn't war, what was it? Well, the current thinking has shifted away from people and towards nature. The evidence now points to a 1-2 punch from the environment, a massive shift in the climate that made the region much, much drier, and the slow, gradual drying up of the gigantic Sarasvati River, which had been the lifeline for so many of their cities.
The people themselves didn't just vanish into thin air, but their civilization, their whole urban way of life, simply couldn't be supported anymore. The administration fell apart, and the Harappans had to adapt, scattering into smaller farming villages where it was easier to find water and grow food. The first great urban chapter in India's history had come to an end.
And that leaves us with a really powerful final thought. The Harappans built one of the most brilliant and advanced societies of the ancient world, and yet, in the end, they were brought down by changes to their climate and their environment. It really makes you wonder, as we face our own environmental challenges today, just how different are we, really?